I don't think you need to grow the tree to be able to actually grow the fruit. I think we might be able to do the same thing with apples. I mean, I did it with tomatoes. So you go into a greenhouse, that tomato vine, they spend a lot of time growing that vine before they initiate the flowering to get the tomatoes from it. You know, in our Rotary Garden, I started initiating that flowering part of it, the fruiting part of it, way early, you know, within a week of the plants taking root in the system. And, you know, you got to weed through it, pardon the expression, to find the right type of plant. The beefsteaks didn't work. The stems were brittle, the fruit's huge, and it's not well attached. But like a guy who doesn't know anything about the horse track, I'm picking the names that I like, and I find a seed that was called the Tumbler. I'm like, oh, something's trying to talk to me there. So I try the Tumblers. Now those are the cluster on the vine, cue ball sized things that are quite popular in the supermarkets, and they worked fabulously.
The last time we had a Democrat-led Congress and president was during the first years of the Obama administration. Janet Yellen was the Fed chair then, and now soon to be the new Treasury Secretary under Biden. Obamacare was passed, President Obama and Congress sent billions to banks and Wall Street. That was the perfect recipe, and gold soared more than 200% from 2008 to 2011. Patriot Gold Group has the no-fee-for-life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no-fee-for-life IRA. So go ahead and give the folks at Patriot Gold Group a call to discuss physical gold and silver. And the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer 5 years in a row from 2016 till present. Click the link in the description box below for more information. And now on with the video. And I thank every single one of you for joining our conversation tonight. I'm with Ted Marchildon, the developer of Omega Rotary Garden. This is an innovation that we need to be able to bring indoor vertical agriculture to feed our planet, and how we can protect ourselves and your families by improving on some of the old designs in castle forts, Moat Bailey, and putting distance between the people who want to take your food. I was pointing out that the new Tesla Tower innovation is located in Texas. That's wireless power technology, along with the Tesla oscillators and the ways to generate power. And we need to be moving to magnetic motors, but at the same time we do, we're going to have to think about vertical indoor agriculture and gains in agricultural productivity to get us through this grand solar minimum. So instead of relying on a centralized distribution system for electricity, we should use magnetic motors in our homes to power not only our homes and our heaters, air conditioners, but we should also be using that to grow our own food in our homes more efficiently. And Omega Garden is where we're going to start tonight. So Ted, I appreciate you joining me. I know you had some interesting ideas today when we were chatting back and forth, just sending a couple texts. So what's on your mind after seeing what's happening in Texas and how we can couple this with magnetic motors? And I know you're into the I-Jing. Also, you know, going back into the Sumerian myths and legends, technologies, and how things are past are repeating. And where do we go from here?
Well, it's a pleasure speaking with you, Dave. Starting with the I-ching, that's basically how I happened upon what it is that I'm doing now with the Omega. I was training, injury brought me to Tai Chi, which brought me to the I-ching, which got me walking in circles. That, in a longabout way, came to the development of this garden. And then my partner wanted to patent it, and I didn't. So that was the first time I went to a question to the Oracle, the I-ching, over the technology. And so I asked it, you know, how do I protect it, patents, etc. And the answer that I got basically described the system. Physically, it described it. It described it as the cauldron, and then there was legs. Over them was the belly, and then the handles, and then the carrying rings. I can point to those things on the system: legs, belly, handles, carrying rings. Check, 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 check. And then it described it as being turned upside down to remove stagnating stuff. And the motor turns it upside down constantly. And there's actually an archetype of stagnation, which is heaven over earth, and heaven is ascending, leaving earth behind in confusion and disorder. And when I think about that, I think, well, that sounds very much like a grand solar minimum. Instead of heaven ascending, the sun is going to sleep. So close enough. And then just yesterday, I asked the oracle about Enlil, and I shared that with you. And Enlil was number 12, no changing lines. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting. And then Enki, the brother who apparently created us, that was taming power of the great, I believe. And then Sitchin, who brought it all to the point where I could wrap my brain around it. That was providing nourishment, leading to the receptive, which is paired with the creative. Gets a little bit involved. So when we get back to the garden again, it went from the cauldron to the universal archetype of abundance, which is, I'll read it to you here. It is number 55, which is fire inside movement. Jen is movement, Li is flame, whose attribute is clarity. Clarity within, movement without. This produces greatness and abundance. Pretty handy if your garden happens to be embracing that archetype. And the stagnation with heaven over earth, and the two elements are out of relation. If you look at your greenhouse model, all that lighting at the top of the greenhouse, that's actually not growing those plants. It's actually annoying them so that they stay awake and don't go to seed. And we had all the greenhouses around where I am, which is Vancouver Island. They're all on the mainland near Vancouver, only because it's fairly warm here. The oceans keep it warm. They all got bought up by the pot companies that had all kinds of money and not knowing what to do. And they tried to grow pot with them and found them to be quite useless, and then basically unloaded them. I don't know what they're doing now, if anything's growing in them or not. It's kind of a bad colonial archetype. You know, the queen had one, and the original one was actually built for a Roman Emperor Tiberius. He led to Caligula, so you can imagine there's issues there. Anyway, a glass house is not going to help you out very much in grand solar minimum. All we need is one good hailstorm, or good wind, or combination, or just to be a little bit too cold, or a little bit too hot. Anything outside the Goldilocks zone, and those greenhouses aren't good for much. Besides, they're out in the sticks, you know, so there's transportation issues, there's all kinds of issues. And if we're going to have hungry mobs rolling around, transportation is going to be an issue. You want a system, I believe, and you want to organize society so that you're protecting that farming. Nobody can just come and steal all your crops from you. And then it doesn't have to travel very far. So I've got a model called the farm dominium, which has got a concrete dome in the center where all of our gardenings are, which don't need daylight. And then it's surrounded by what I call the habitat ring, which is a sort of a village model. And when I look back through history, it looks like a 21st century Moat Bailey. So pre-castle structures, you dug a round moat, put the dirt on the high ground in the center, and that expanded from there into defensive structures and whatnot. But you farmed on the outside of that. So your food was always subject to something happening. Whereas this, again, is a protective model for that. The nice thing about all this is it can be rolled out extremely rapidly. Monolithic.com. You'll see monolithic domes there, and you can do some YouTube searches for them, and you will see very rapid deployment of these domes. The barrels that I'm doing for the gardens, these are like 55-gallon barrels. Very rapid manufacturing process. These could be rolled out. One company that I know of could probably do about 1,500 to 2,000 of these units a day if they're running around the clock. There are lots of these molds in particular for this type of barrel manufacturing. I'm just retooling something that's already in use for the shipping industry. And I've been developing a way to auto storage and retrieve those things on a large scale. So the farm dominium houses like 115,000 of these things. And just when you start crunching the math on that, 80 plants in each, you're feeding several thousand people. Archetype abundance, you want it to be more than you need because there's going to be people around that you need to really pass some food security onto. Caloric is the basis of all of it. The fire in the belly is equal to 80 watts. You got to power that to keep you working. I was speaking to somebody today who was telling me about Afghanistan and how there's a shortage of food there, and they do not have enough energy to go about and do things. So people are, basically lying around looking like they're, possibly lazy. But if you haven't got enough, if you've only got enough to power 60 watts instead of 80 watts, then you might not have enough energy to get out and get anything done. And you probably know throughout these grand solar minimums, for example, in Europe, where they were building cathedrals, there are sections in time, because some of them took centuries to do, where they ran through grand solar minimums and nothing got built in that time. It wasn't until they got enough caloric intake after the event that they could start building again. We're heading into some nasty conditions, but those bode well for actually having to get some stuff done. You don't do anything if you don't have to. If you have to do something, then you stand a chance on getting it done. Not that means you're going to be able to get it done, but your chances are way better that you're actually going to get something done.
Yeah, Ted, let me stop you for a second here. Anybody who wants to see a model of this rotary grow unit that we're talking about, OmegaGarden.com?
You can certainly see stuff there.
The images I was using in my video from earlier today all came from OmegaGarden.com. And, Ted and I, we've known each other for several years now, talking back and forth. One thing you were talking about in our very first conversations that we had was going toward the target part of a wheat plant versus not having to grow the entire stalk, of just going for the target part of the plant and having an incredibly short stalk with it and just having the wheat head come out of that. How viable is that still moving forward? Where could we do it with sorghum? Millet won't hold together. The things are too small to probably slip out of the shell. But if we're talking about any kind of grains, how viable is that to do in a rotary grow system?
I think the wheat shouldn't be too difficult. I know there have been dwarf wheats developed, and I was made aware of those through some NASA programs. And you can get samples from them. I think that could be done. I don't think you need to grow the tree to be able to actually grow the fruit. I think we might be able to do the same thing with apples. I mean, I did it with tomatoes. So you go into a greenhouse, that tomato vine, they spend a lot of time growing that vine before they initiate the flowering to get the tomatoes from it. In our Rotary Garden, I started initiating that flowering part of it, the fruiting part of it, way early, within a week of the plants taking root in the system. And you got to weed through it, pardon the expression, to find the right type of plant. The beefsteaks didn't work. The stems were brittle, the fruit's huge, and it's not well attached. But like a guy who doesn't know anything about the horse track, I'm picking the names that I like, and I find a seed that was called the Tumbler. I'm like, oh, something's trying to talk to me there. So I try the tumblers. Now, those are the cluster on the vine, cue ball size things that are quite popular in the supermarkets, and they worked fabulously. The stems are quite tough, the fruit's very well attached and not very large. Came off in clusters, beautiful stuff. Same thing happened with the peppers. The bell peppers didn't work too well, they were too big. But some smaller varieties and hot peppers and things like that worked fabulously. While I'm on the hot peppers, that reminds me of something. Everybody who's freezing with the power outages, when I was a young man working flat roofing in Ontario, everybody's dancing to keep warm. And then I forget how I came upon it, but hot pepper powder in my socks. And all of a sudden, I am fabulous. It's minus whatever out, the wind's whipping, everybody else is dancing, and I'm just standing around with a smile on my face.
So what do you mean? You put the chili pepper in your socks to sort of get on your feet to give you that extra warmth or heat, or how'd that work?
You have to watch that you don't put too much on there, because then you're dancing again with the hot foot. You just put the powder in your socks, put your socks on, and you're good to go. It'll warm you up real fast, and then as your feet start to sweat a little bit, the more moisture in it, you can get a feedback loop. That's why I said you don't put too much in. Just like if the opposite, if you're out in a cold day and you can put your feet in the cool water, then you're good to go, right? You feel no problem. So same with the heat. If you're in a cold climate and you put the cayenne pepper, if your feet are warm, then you're a long way to being very, very good. Not that it's a cure-all or anything. Your power's out and your pipes are frozen, and I can't imagine, especially if you're not at all ready for any kind of cold, if you haven't got the clothing for it. And I know people that in the summertime, even up here and where I am, that would come up if they're from some very southern place. They come up here, it's warm to me, and they're freezing. It's all relative. So if you're used to it being warm and all of a sudden it's cold, not very much helps. But if your feet can be warm, you're good to go.
Yeah, and let me throw one other thing out there. When I was traveling in India, in the Himalaya, in the guest houses up there, this is back in the mid 90s. Everything was still pretty rudimentary, but I found lighting a couple of candles in your room, as long as you keep everything shut, drapes shut, door closed, a couple candles will actually warm your room up enough where it doesn't seem so cold inside. Although it might affect you going to sleep because it's much brighter, those two candles, believe it or not, will have an amazing effect on warming a small space. And I don't know how many people are really ready for emergencies. I talk about it all the time. That's kind of on my forefront. How many people have a generator, extra LNG tanks, or any kind of extra clothing, water heaters, flashlights, emergency food? Hardly anybody. Who has an extra 1 pound propane bottle that has like a little camp stove laying around so if you can cook some meals during a power outage? Probably 1% or less of the people. So, how unprepared are we as, Americans or Canadians or even Europeans around for situations like this? Unless you're living that preparedness lifestyle, you're going to be unprepared. And I wonder how many people it shook awake finally.
Getting clued in after the fact, that's a harsh lesson.
Imagine when it's food next time, when you have the perfect solution for getting us to autonomy and food production for ourselves, for our communities, for our cities. What's the effect going to be after somebody starved to death in a place or they're on the verge of famine? It's hard to come back from that and get the after effect. The power will come back on down where it's off now. People will heat back up again. But when you go into a famine or a full lack of food production globally because of this grand solar minimum, and after the fact is a decade after that.
I believe I shared a video with you about the natives from the Four Corners. Gentlemen there, I don't remember the names. Bit ill prepared for this one. But the research that he was doing was about the bones and the processing that had gone on there. The gist of the whole video was that there's a 200-year global cannibal cycle. And the First Nations were not happy to hear about that. They thought
they tried to hide it, didn't they? I watched that stuff you gave me.
Right. But then somebody took a dump in their ceremonial cauldron, and the testing that the scientists did on it came clear that there was human DNA in that dump. Somebody had been eaten, and then somebody took a crap in that bowl, and the person who took the crap in that bowl had eaten human flesh. And then that spurred a bunch of people, a bunch of other scientists around the world to do similar testing. And they found that this is a global cannibal cycle that happens every 200 years. And that has to be due to the grand soil minimum cycle. I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be, but I can't figure out anything else, any other reason why that would be.
And didn't they find charred bones and broken fragments of bones in that as well, where somebody had like sort of processed and took the marrow out of the bones too?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was a lot of processing there. And the video starts out with the guy. He's got, rocks that were made into processing tools. And he's getting his hands dirty, trying to figure out the process for processing the flesh and the bones. And, it's a lot of damn work. But, you do it if you're starving, right?
He got vilified for 20 years. They didn't take him seriously. It took him, 18, 20 years before his research really got looked at. And they were like, no, I can't believe it never happened, didn't it? Like, how many times in history have we seen this? A person going off on their own finds a new thesis on the way things were and the established science. And then, he was vilified for even daring to speak out as such an atrocity would take place. And then, boom, he's correct.
Well, somebody doesn't want us to know this stuff. The Chinese call humans long pig. Why is that? Well, apparently we taste like pork. So they know. I'm always saying there's two classifications, the eager and the reluctant cannibals. So when the time is right, in order to set up a farm dominium, I want to do interviews with people that want to participate to weed out the eager cannibals. Or maybe they're on the outside, they're the first layer of protection.
Yeah, because Moat and Bailey, I would think that, having that ring around like they did with the moat, when you think about a castle, to be tapped into a natural outflowing spring. So even if somebody tried to drop something in the water, it would refresh itself after 12 or 24 hours, and it would just keep pouring out into fresh water around that you could also use to pull out for irrigation because you'd have your pipe subsurface.
Right. So with the moat in the farm dominium, it's actually the habitat ring. So you might actually, if you're going to have a moat, you'd push it out further than that. But I've seen a lot of ancient structures where to get in and out, you're funneled into a very small pathway, like wide enough for one person. And then over top, you had sort of like balconies where your archers could be stationed, and you'd never be able to get in. You couldn't rush the place. A few well-placed arrows, and then you'd have an obstacle, and you would never get in.